Well, a few years ago, John Pavlovitz was just a former pastor writing a little blog read by just a few people. And then one particular day, he wrote one particular blog, and suddenly it was shared millions of times. And now he is followed by hundreds of thousands of people, and he is one of the most loved writers and communicators in what is known as progressive Christianity. We have people here this morning who have driven a great distance because they saw that John was going to be here, and if he is in a proximity they can get to, they said they wanted to get here and they wanted to meet him. This is his second time at the Village. Would you give a warm welcome, John Pavlovitz? Now, we were talking the other day, and preachers talk about, what would you like me to teach on? Is there any subject that you'd like me to address? We're talking about it being Labor Day weekend. We're talking about the fact that it's going to be a different crowd. And I said, what do you think about us just talking? Maybe me asking you some questions. And you said, 2 pastors, no net. And I love that. I thought that's pretty good because he came in last night, spent the night at our house, but we have not talked about any of these questions. It's going to be just going to see what happens. And I think you're going to get a good feel for him. I think there's going to be some good information that's going to be shared. And every time I have been with John, my heart feels like it grows a little bit. And so that's my hope more than anything is your heart will grow. If that's true, it'll be great. It'll be great. So can we just jump in? Absolutely. Quickly, I want you to tell me a little about your growing up years, upstate New York, and a little bit about your early faith walk.
Sure. Grew up in Syracuse, New York. I always tell people fairly traditional Italian Roman Catholic family, so I was raised on gluten and guilt. And, for me, I was well loved growing up, but I was also fairly sheltered. And so I had some, great stories in my life of a God who loved me, a family who was for me, but I had a lot of false stories too. And as most people, I drifted from my faith as I got into the college years. But I landed in Philadelphia. I talk about that in the book, that Philadelphia really changed me. I don't know if you've ever been in a place where all of a sudden you saw things you had never seen before, that you experienced life in a way that you had never realized life existed. And those stories that I started to get on the ground in Philadelphia, they started to change me. They started to mess with me. And the process of that messing with is really what shaped my spiritual journey. So 10 years after my time in Philly, arriving there, I had no idea I was going to be a pastor. That was definitely not the plan. But for me, the pastor that I wanted to be was the kind of person that I was when I was in Philadelphia, around this diversity, around people doing really beautiful work. I just wanted to be a part of it. And so for me, it was trying to figure out, could I be that person in ministry?
Very cool. Now, before you got into ministry, is that when you were the rock singer?
Yeah, this was not the plan. Also, my plan was not the plan. The original plan was to be a rock star. That I was going to be on cover of Rolling Stone magazine. And I said to my father, what do you think? Could I try this? And he said, I'll, let you take a year off of school, but if you aren't on Billboard, top 40 by the time the year ends, you're going to go back to school, and then you're going to have to pay some of your way. So that's what I did. So here I am.
You ended up 10 years though, traveling, right?
Yeah, I traveled around the Northeast, and if it was the Bon Jovi years. So there was long hair, there was spandex, there was all those things, but for me, the love of music and brought me into all these places, into these bars that I would have never walked into, and that was actually revelatory for me because I got to meet real people and people that I would have never met otherwise, and I still feel like that was all prepped for ministry.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. Now let me ask you this, because you eventually go into ministry. I'm sure small church, but eventually you get to like a mega church staff.
Yes.
And then you're led out of mega church, or so, what happened there?
Well, I tell people, if you had met me in 2005, I was super Christian mega pastor man. I was up there in front of thousands of people, and I was doing life-giving work, and the church was growing, and our youth ministry had hundreds of kids, and it really worked for me until it didn't. And for me, there was a tension in me between who I felt Jesus was calling me to be and the pastor that I felt I was expected to be. And there was my sort of, there was organized religion and my very disorganized spirituality, and they were always pulling at one another. And I just felt that I needed to nudge the congregation a little bit each week if I could. And but I knew that there was going to be a place where that tension would be too great, either for me or for the church that I was a part of.
And then how did it end?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I tell people that I heard God calling me to leave my church, and it came in the form of my pastor's voice saying, "You're fired."
Yeah.
Right? It was there was just too much, and so for me, it was a devastating moment, but it was a moment of freedom and release. Because what many of us have experienced now is when we can ask anything and say everything in our spiritual journeys, there's so much life in that. There is nothing to be afraid of those questions. Unemployment was challenging, right? That fear, but the idea that God is not intimidated by my questions and God is not taken aback by my doubts, and that if God is God, God can handle all the pushback that I give in the form of my struggle.
Yeah, it is funny that they want so much evangelical background that I come from. They want certainty. They want no questions. They don't want you to ever question who can sit at the table. And they really don't know what to do when you ask those questions.
Yeah, there's something that happens. Most of the people in this room understand when you begin leaning into those theological questions, there is a lot of collateral damage, right? It's not just this one issue. For me, sexuality was the path that I began walking down to sort of unearth the truth. But then, of course, everything else gets shaken. And I said, no one really has time for an existential crisis, right? So we don't have the time in our days to really let everything drop out. But that's what happens when we begin asking those questions. And that's why so many people fear it, because life is difficult, right, on its best days, and most of us are just trying to get through, let alone to have the bottom from our faith drop out and things that used to be steady become shaky.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you this. Your first viral article was titled, "If I Have Gay Children, 4 Promises from a Christian Pastor/Parent."
Right.
And I want to read, if I can, just
Sure.
a little bit from that viral post, because you've got, I'm guessing, a few hundred people that are following you.
Yeah, just
not
my
many.
relatives and friends.
Yeah,
And
just
things
relatives
like
and
that.
friends.
My mother, and
So he writes this post, and here's just a little bit from it. "If I have gay children, I'll love them. I don't mean some token, distant, tolerant love that stays at safe arm's length. It will be an extravagant, open-hearted, unapologetic, lavish, embarrassing them in the school cafeteria kind of love. And I won't love them despite their sexuality, and I won't love them because of it. I'll love them simply because they're sweet and funny and caring and smart and kind and stubborn and flawed and original and beautiful and mine." And guess what? The world said, "Who is John Pavlovitz?" And I think millions, and do you have any idea how many now have seen it?
It's 5-6 million, something.
Just 5 to 6 million. Anyway, it went all over the place. You've been viral since then, too. Most people go viral, hopefully, once in their life.
Yeah.
He has gone viral a few times. I don't know if y'all remember.
That'd be clarified as a sickness, going viral that many times, right?
Yeah, Brock Turner. I don't know if you remember him. He was a college swimmer, and he raped a girl left her at a garbage dump at the college. And John wrote a blog addressed to his father, who was pleading for mercy for his son. And it was powerful. I read it, and that was another one that went viral. But then even bigger than that, after the election, you wrote another blog, and even that went even bigger. Mm-hmm. You've done it more than once. Does virility, is that the word, require controversy? I want you to talk just a moment about how this worked.
Well, you know what for me was extraordinary to realize was that post, "If I Have Gay Children," that was really me trying to say, Christians have dehumanized the issue of sexuality so much, and I wanted to humanize it. I wanted to personalize it. So I started talking about the things that we have in common in our families. And I write that post, and it goes viral. And my wife walks in, and she said, "Pastor says he would love his kids, and he was 11. Why was that news?" So it was controversial only to people who had a hard time seeing LGBTQ people as fully human, right? Yeah. And same thing with the Brock Turner, to say, well, maybe you shouldn't sexually assault women. Why was a pastor saying that such a novel thing? I think that speaks to the fact that so many times Christian leaders are deathly silent on really important things. So going viral is really, I wrote that first blog post from the most personal place that I had. And I always, tell people I was on CNN the next day and it says, John Pavlovitz, pastor. And I said, it might as well say currently unemployed and despondent, right? Because that's the lie of all that. But for me, it's all the more reason that I tell people, whatever you care deeply about, whatever the burden is, lean into that burden and to speak those things. Because at the time I wrote that blog post, I had no job, I had no, capital campaign behind me, I had no social media powerhouse. It was simply those words spoken from the deepest place. And so I always tell people to share your story and to use your voice, and that is going to do things that you could never imagine and reach people that you would never reach otherwise. So the viral thing for me was just a gift that I was able to stand in front of hundreds of thousands of people and say, you're a human being and you're beautiful and you matter and you're loved. And then that gave some people hope and it ticked off some people.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with both of those.
Yeah. Now, is there any process in your mind that says, I'm going to write this controversial thing, or these were not even thoughts that were controversial when you wrote them in your mind?
No, I mean, for me, I'm just in this place saying, what keeps me up at night? I'm going to speak about the things that keep me up at night because I have a feeling it keeps other people up at night. And so the idea of whether or not something is going to be well received or become widely read, it doesn't occur to you if you're really writing from the pure place or speaking from the pure place. In fact, you're not thinking about what the cost of saying those words are going to be. So yeah, it's...
What was so amazing to me, this was 3 or 4 years ago, but suddenly I was reading this personalizing of gay people, and it was radical. It was not being done. Everybody wanted to talk theology. They wanted to talk about the passage in Leviticus. They want to talk about Romans 1, and it's like, these are human beings, and you nailed it. It was awesome. If you haven't read that, you've got to look it up. You have to read it because it's one of the beautiful passages I've ever read.
Thank you.
And let me ask you this. As you have connected with an ever-expanding audience, have you had to do things differently? I'm thinking about even how I could learn from you as your audience has gotten larger. Is there anything I could learn from you, maybe as a pastor of a church that wants to reach more people?
Well, for me, I was given a gift of being fired, right? So then I didn't have the tethers of being a local church pastor, because being a local church pastor for 23 years, I understand the inherent constraints. You're beholden to a group of people because you love those people. But what, for me right now, I think if I hear one thing from a really disparate audience that comes to me through the blog is they are feeling questions that they wish someone would give voice to. They are in spiritual communities and saying, don't the pastors care about the issues happening in the world? Aren't these pastors engaged in the life outside of the church building? And so for pastors, I'm always asking them to be brave. I'm always asking them to speak the words that you really feel like you would speak if you weren't a pastor. Because sometimes people are all waiting for you to speak that truth. So for me, that blog post it gave people a permission in the church to say, can we talk about this again? And there are so many people who are not in a building like this today, but are deeply spiritual. They understand about the beauty of humanity, and they're looking for a place to live that out in community. And so the church should be the place where we can do that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, when you wrote the blog, and you became a hero, I think, to millions of LGBTQ people. What's that been like?
Well, for me, it's the idea that a group of people, what they did was, I think they said, this person is for me. Whether they see me as heroic or not, they say, here's someone who's in my corner. And as that person has gotten some notoriety or a wider audience, then maybe they feel like more people are exposed to just that thought process. So for me, it's not as if I woke up that morning saying, I'm going to become an ally to the LGBTQ community. I just said, I love these people dearly, and I want to express that. So there are all sorts of wonderful and difficult things that come with being seen as a public ally. But for me, I tell people all the time, anything that I received in negative energy or pushback or consequences, it pales in comparison to what an LGBTQ person goes through every day. And so for me, it's a privilege to experience some of that collateral damage on their behalf.
Last night we were talking, and Stan Mitchell surprised us and came in just a few minutes ago.
Glitterati.
I know, it's like, oh my gosh, that was a surprise. But you quoted Stan last night. I don't know if you remember the exact quote, but it was like, if the rocks hurled at them, if we're not getting a little bit of that, then...
Right. Yeah, I mean, there is no clean way to be an ally for marginalized communities or to even speak into the community where you are without some turbulence. Yeah. If I were going to be coming here and just giving you one message today, it would be to look at the life of Jesus and to see how living for compassion and mercy and equality and love and justice is going to cause you turbulence, and you're going to be in that place of constant shaking. And for me, as difficult as that can be, it's the place I want to be.
Yeah. Now I want you to just search your mind quickly and is there a story that jumps out that kind of has been your connection to people that have been marginalized, that you've been able to say these things and maybe a story of meeting them? Is there anything that comes to mind that you can share as a personal story?
Well, it's actually just, I was at a youth ministry function and it was my first day in the mega church, the first youth group day event. All the parents were coming. We had this rented out facility, totally tricked out. And I am in super pastor mode, trying to make sure I impress everyone, because this was the big leagues for me. And I remember doing what I call hummingbirding. I kind of flitter around and say hello when I can leave and, say a few words. And in the periphery of the room, there were two students there, and they had their arms crossed. And I went over and I tried to share some kind words with them and talk to them. And they were giving me nothing. I had my youth pastor material, all my introductory jokes and all that. Nothing was working. But I welcomed them. I got to know their names. And then I left. And 3 days later, I got an email from one of those students. And it was a girl. And she said, the sister, and she said, I don't know if you remember us, but she said, we were there because we were forced to be there. We had a horrible experience in the church before, and we really didn't want anything to do with that moment. But you came up to us, and she said, you made me feel visible. And she said, I haven't felt visible in a long time. And that stayed with me, because the idea that there are people who live this life regularly invisible to many people or disregarded, that to me is the heart of Jesus, right? That is Jesus saying the least of these are the ones who are not seen. And so that's what I try to do every day, is to scan the place where I live and the place where I work and shop and say, who is not being seen? Who is not being heard? Is there anything that I can do to leverage my privilege to change that?
I love that. Now, let me ask you to say a word about how you read kind of the American church now, Christianity at large, how you kind of see that. And a little bit of evangelical is what I'm thinking. So,
well, I think we're confused. I think we're at a point where, people talk about, John, you write, you get so politically pointed with what you write, and I have them revisit the blog 2016 and before, when I never mentioned these things, because there was always a sense that the church is working this out together. We're trying to figure this out. And I think we have arrived at a place where there is a schism, and it's not between progressive and conservative theology. It's between a deep love of humanity, of empathy and compassion, and then contempt for people who are different. There's fear on this side, and there's compassion here. And we have to choose as followers of Jesus which we're going to lean into. And that goes with regard to the people that we disagree with too. But for me, I think right now the church is saying, and people who have been in the church are saying, if it's not filled with empathy and love and deep compassion, I want no part of it. I don't care what you call it. I want to be a part of something redemptive and beautiful. And what I'm finding with the people that I'm reaching through the blog is they just get together, and I'll be on a tour stop, and there are Christians and non-Christians, there are atheists, there are people of every persuasion, and they say, we have gathered here because we know there are there are hoops we don't have to jump through, there are struggles we don't have to worry about having, we are just loved as we are. And I think, I don't care if we call that the church anymore some days, I just want to be a part of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but like we have the two people that I know of that are very, very smart people who would say that they are atheist, but they love the vibe at this place. They love that they can state that and they're not kicked out. They love that we're trying to help people and be compassionate for people. And I know if they were in any other church, they would not be treated probably the same way. So I love that compassion or no compassion is kind of what you see as the division.
Yeah, I just think people are now saying, I either see it in you or I don't. I don't care what your statement of faith says. I don't care what your website says. I don't care what the songs on the screen say. If I don't experience love when I meet you, I'm leaving. And I'd say to them, I'm out here with you too.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this, because I grew up thinking that church, we could never be political.
Right.
But over the last couple of years, I have felt that there were things that just didn't seem. There was a fear that was being spread, and there was a mistrust of people based on skin color. And so I am moving towards, if I'm going to be socially active and I'm going to care about social justice, I have to speak more about that. Was that a difficult jump for you, or did you just wake up one day and say, I've got to say this?
Well, I mean, that's just been my journey. My journey has taught me speak clearly, because as you speak clearly, it's going to clarify the people who are with you, the people who are upset by you, but it's also going to give you that direction rather than trying to talk around it and to couch it. So speaking explicitly was something that was important to me. And I really carry no burdens about the idea of politics, because for me, silence is a political position, right? Silence is a political statement whenever there's injustice happening. And if you were to say to Jesus, Jesus, tell me, is caring for the planet, is that a political thing or a spiritual thing, right? Is healthcare for people, is that a spiritual thing or is it a political thing? I feel like I know what the answer would be. I don't feel like to Jesus there was any separation. And so I think as responsible citizens of the planet who claim that we believe and follow a God of love, there can be nothing that is off limits to our personal faith.
Yeah, I love that. I will say this, when I announced that John was going to be here, I had two friends write me. One said, why in the world would you let John Pavlovitz come to the church?
That was Stan.
No.
Right.
And then, but he's a sweet guy, and I love this man very much. He was a part of our church for a long time. I love this man very much. And so I invited him to come today, and wasn't able to come, I guess. And then another person said that they were going to pray for my soul, as if that were in jeopardy somehow because of my friendship with you. I know, it's like, and I wanted to say to him that I have never felt like I am closer to the path I'm supposed to be on as a follower of Jesus. We talked this morning about Mike Yaconelli, and you said he's a writer that has passed away. He was a great youth leader. But you said he presented a Christianity that was fresh to you, that you had never experienced before, seen before. Is that true?
Well, I think there was a messiness to him, and he just said, here's me, I'm a disaster, I love Jesus, I can do both. And I think there is often a sense of, okay, if I'm going to follow Jesus, I'm going to get to this point where all of a sudden I've figured it out. And I think it's unfigure-outable, some of this stuff. We're always going to be flawed and messy. And so he helped me just embrace an honesty in my Christianity that as a youth pastor is difficult, right? It's one thing to be there and sitting where you are today or sitting where you're watching this and say, I'm really struggling with this. It's another to be a pastor and to feel like I have to have it all figured out, or at least pretend I do. And I just stopped pretending slowly.
Man, I want to shift gears just a little bit. I appreciate everything you've said about the politics. And I want you to know he shoots very straight, and he feels like the last election we had, has been something unlike anything in our country's history, and he speaks very strongly about that. So just know, if you're not familiar with that, you need to read some of the things John's written.
Yeah, read it after we're done here. Otherwise there'll be a disturbance.
Yeah. But here's what I want to ask you. You have written very eloquently about depression, which I find fresh, because most superstar guys that have this huge platform, anything like that, they kind of want to keep under wraps, and yet it's real. Can you say just a word about it?
Yeah, oh, for me, I've lived with depression for decades, and there was a period of time as I entered the church and entered ministry, I began to feel like those were parts of me that I had to leave in the back. And what I realized was that's doing a huge disservice to people who are coming to me with the deepest struggles that they have, and so that authenticity was important. And so I've tried to be honest in the blog and honest when I'm preaching, and especially dealing with students, because students, they're trying to process so much, and if you can let them know, I have an inkling of what you're going through, it really helps. But for me, it's kind of peeling back a curtain and letting some light into that very dark place that is the head of a person with mental illness. And there are times for me, I know you've done the Happiness Project, and there are times when I had to realize happiness is going to escape me right now. And because of what's happening in my head, the story that my head is telling myself, I can't look at data in front of me and just say, I'm going to see this and be happy. So for part of me is always remembering that there are people out there who are fighting battles, and it's an inside job. They're fighting their heads. And so we've got stuff that we're dealing with in our communities and injustices and all sorts of circumstantial stuff. But I know that there are battles that we're fighting internally. And once in a while, it's good for someone to hear someone speak it because they can breathe for a second. Yeah. And sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I also wanted to ask you, because you also write, and every time you do, it touches something deep in me. You write about the sudden passing of your father. I don't know if you ever talk about that, but I just wanted people to hear kind of a little bit about that.
Yeah, gosh, a woman came up to me. I was at the Decatur Book Festival, and she came up to me afterward, and she said, your writing on grief is the thing that sustained me, because it reached me at the right moment when I was at a pivotal point in my process. My dad passed away suddenly 5 years ago, and for me, it was the dividing line in my life of before and after, right? That's how my life is divided. And I started writing about 3 days after his death, and as sort of just a cathartic experience. But people started to say, this is helping me. And so I began documenting that first year, writing every week. And grief is another one of those things that it's so difficult for us to come into. You don't hear a lot of praise songs about grieving. Right, the songs are all God is wonderful, everything's great, and meanwhile you're completely falling apart. And so I love to lean into those places. And for me, it's 5-year anniversary of my father's passing. I pulled out a bag to come here, and out popped his obituary that someone had laminated for me, and it was as if I was grieving on day one again. And so we're always walking through that, right? That grief is always there for us. I think it's important to speak to that.
We're winding down. I want to ask you, funerals these last couple of days, the Aretha funeral.
Yes.
Was that a long funeral? That was a long funeral, wasn't it? They say if Beyonce dies, it's going to be 3 days, because it was long. It was really long. But then John McCain's funeral. So I just wanted to ask you what you'd like to set a view at your memorial service. Hopefully way down the road.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for me, I hope people say, this planet is more loving and compassionate and kind because he was here. That's it. Because fairly soon, none of the people in this building are going to be here. And we're trying to craft something that is going to outlive us. And so I hope that something that I'm doing now will still be with people.
I love that. We saw him in the Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina a couple of months ago. Stan was speaking there, and John was speaking. And John interviewed Jen Hatmaker, who's a wonderful Christian lady and writer. You ended that with a lightning round with her.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And so I wanted to throw lightning round at you, and just see kind of first thoughts, and just see this will be kind of how we end. You grew up in an Italian family in upstate New York, and you moved to Philly for college. Philly cheesesteak or lasagna?
Oh, lasagna, because my mom can't make a cheesesteak.
All right. Tattoos or no tattoos?
We don't know one another well enough. But okay. No tattoos.
Current TV show you and your wife love binge watching?
The only thing I binge watch is from the 70s or earlier, so The Odd Couple. It's a terrible answer, but that's how it is.
If you could sing one song on American Idol, what would it be?
Hold on a second. Let me... something from Prince, probably.
Yeah, you love Prince.
I'll sing Purple Rain. I'll skip the guitar part. Maybe Stan can play that.
Yeah. Oh, you're not going to sing it now?
Oh, gosh, no. Okay. No, I'm sorry. That's all the time we have.
3 favorite books of all time.
Probably, oh, gosh. I think Love Wins.
Rob Bell, if y'all haven't read that yet.
There's a book called Then We Came to the End, which is a book about a corporate setting and everything falling apart and all people trying to fall apart while they're holding this thing together. And probably Brian McLaren's We Make the Road by Walking.
Very cool. Very cool. Favorite word?
Serendipitous.
Least favorite word?
I can't say my least favorite word right now.
Favorite city in the U.S. besides the one you live in?
Philadelphia. No brainer. No brainer.
Most influential person in your life to whom you're not related to?
Probably, gosh, Tony Campolo.
Tony Campolo.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What will you be doing this coming Thursday night?
I will be packing to head to a town in Illinois to speak about the bigger table, and just getting excited to meet them.
Well, that was not the right answer. You're going to be watching your Philadelphia Eagles lose to our Atlanta Falcons on Thursday night. I didn't know if you didn't realize that.
That is all the time we have. I'm sorry. It's going to be a bloodbath here, folks.
Last question. Last word you'd want to leave with all of us at the Village today.
Don't underestimate the power of your voice and the beauty of your story. The life that you are living is exceptionally powerful, and the words and the lessons that you've learned can alter the planet. If you will lean into your convictions and speak them boldly, you will find they will lead you to places you never imagined, and I'm living testimony to that. You have a story to tell, so please tell it.
I love that. I love that. You brought some books, very few books.
We have a couple books, yeah.
Couple of books. If you want his book, A Bigger Table, great book. And then he has a new book that's coming out. You want to make sure you get A Bigger Table, but also get his new book, which is coming out on Election Day, November 6th, and it's called
Hope and Other Superpowers.
And it's going to be awesome. Have you enjoyed John Pavlovitz? Would you give it up?
Thank you.
John,
thank you. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.